When talking about the history of the Second World War, it's very easy to get kind of wrapped up and get tunnel vision on the combat element of World War II. But there's a lot more to the Second World War than just the combat. What I'm referring to is the occupation and how the Nazi invasion of all of Europe affected the people in the occupied countries. Right now, I'm on the island of Guernsey. This is one of the Channel Islands, and we are at a place that we have heard a whole lot about called the Occupation Museum, which tells the story of the people of Guernsey who lived here during the Nazi occupation. All right, now, like I said, we are at the Occupation Museum right here on the island of Guernsey. And everyone that we have talked to on this trip, taxi drivers, everybody, keeps telling us about this museum. So we're going to dodge in here in just a moment, but they've actually got a few pretty cool artifacts here outside of the museum. All right, now, we haven't even made it into the museum yet, and I'm just blown away at all of the cool stuff that I am seeing. So right here, we are looking at a 105 millimeter coastal defense gun barrel. It says that this was dumped in the sea in the summer of 1945. Let's just go up, take a look at this as well. 88 millimeter barrel that was blown off the escort vessel Dr. Rudolf Warrenhoff during Allied air attack. July 24th, 1944, was salvaged in 1989. Got some sea mines, got some tetrahedron obstacles, some hedgehogs. Yeah, this is cool as heck. Before we go inside, I did want to come back to this 88 millimeter gun and make note of something. I've been here with Paul Woodage from World War II TV, and we've been doing a lot of exploring over the past couple days, and there's just an obscene amount of bunkers and fortifications on this island. Well, there were a lot of 88 flak guns here too. It says here on this sign that there were 37 88s placed on Guernsey from 1942 to 1945. So they had 6 per battery, rate of fire of 15 to 20 rounds per minute, and a ceiling range of over 10,000 feet. So, of course, these 88s, as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of RAF flights and American flights over Guernsey and the Channel Islands, and these were designed to protect the occupied area and shoot down any bombers or any reconnaissance planes that might be going over. Oh look, we're walking down to the museum, and here's a Spitfire propeller. It says, in memory of the 153 RAF and Allied air crews lost in Guernsey waters. Okay, so those are a few of the items outside of the museum. This is the collection of a local gentleman here who was born during the occupation of Guernsey, and then as a young man just started collecting things out of the tunnels and out of the fortresses here. So anyway, I'm really anxious to get in here and take a look at what they have. All right, we just got into the museum and have entered into the first room, and my jaw is already on the floor. Amanda, the guide who's been showing us around here the past few days, has already told us that we don't have enough time in this museum, and I believe her. So here on Guernsey, in this museum, we're talking about the German occupation. So here in this room, we start off with looking at a lot of German items. And I'm just going to point out a few things here that maybe catch my eye. Okay, so I'm seeing daggers and obviously some flags and dress swords and different things like that. Let's see. So again, we're just kind of seeing things at the same time that I am. Oh, wow. Here's a copy of Mein Kampf that was recovered from Battery Strasbourg. Interesting. And then there's just all these like wooden items and carved items. You can imagine with there being no combat here on Guernsey or the Channel Islands, a lot of these men would have had a lot of time to create, pieces of art and things like that. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at right here. Here's a carved book, a couple of uniforms. Yeah, this is really, really interesting. Okay, now take a look at this. So what we're looking at right here is a victory sign. So in 1941, islanders started painting these V signs on the walls. The Germans would, come through and use a laurel wreath to imply German victory. So there's kind of like this subversive element where they're kind of almost antagonizing each other here on the island. All right, here's another one of these stones that's painted with a V for victory. Very interesting. Now, of course, any proper museum is going to have a good collection of firearms, and many of the firearms here in this collection, to my understanding, were recovered right here on the island. So this is really quite incredible. Here, take a look at this. This is an MG-34 that has a flak mount on it. This was used at the airport. And I'm just going to point out a few others. Again, like I said, we're fairly limited on time today. But here's a Luger that, of course, for at least Americans, was very popular souvenir gun. And right here, there's a commando raid that takes place here on the island in 1940. And this .38 Webley and Scott revolver belonged to Corporal Dumper, who landed with a party of commandos on July 14th, 1940. He was one of two who couldn't swim and ended up being left behind and ended up surrendering. That is amazing.
So here we have an interpretation of what a child would have looked like who was being evacuated with their school. And this is what happened to my family. So my grandparents had 4 children. My father was just a baby, but he had 2 older sisters who were at school, at different schools. And literally my grandparents had hours to decide what was going to happen with the 2 girls who were at school. So my grandmother one evening went and signed up one daughter at one school, one daughter at a different school, and within 48 hours they were gone. They were sent to England with their school, and my grandparents didn't know where they would end up. My grandparents, with my father and another aunt, ended up evacuating to the UK, and they managed to settle in the north part of the UK. They then start to try and find out where the 2 aunts had been evacuated to with the schools. They managed to find one aunt within 6 weeks. The other aunt, it took 6 months to find where she had been taken. But eventually the family come back together and reside in the north part of England for the rest of the occupation.
All right, here into this room, we get to a whole lot more German items that were left behind here on Guernsey. So last episode, or one of the past episodes, we were looking at some of the range-finding bunkers on the west coast. Well, here is a bunch of the German range-finding equipment that was left behind in those bunkers. And then, again, we're just going to kind of speed run this, unfortunately, because of our schedule. But here are some medical items. A few things that I want to point out here. This is a horse gas mask. So those conical pieces would go up the nostrils of the horse, and then you can see the filters that are attached to them. And then this one is exceptionally amusing to me for some reason. If you look at this club or this truncheon, this is a medical use truncheon. So if you have a patient who is kind of squirming around a bit, well, you just take this and you whop them upside the head and knock them out, and then you can, perform whatever first aid or whatever surgery you need to do. So it's a very blunt form of anesthesia. Here's something that's kind of interesting to me that just caught my eye. So, of course, June 6, 1944, Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy, and the Normandy campaign begins. Well, as the Allies were moving through France, it was going to cut the Germans off here in the Channel Islands, and they were going to kind of be stranded. Well, if you're stranded here on the Channel Islands, how do you get your mail? Well, the answer is this thing right here. This is a field post mail canister, and a German bomber would fly over Guernsey near the airport if it's unable to land, and would just drop the mail in this thing right here. Also, we have an Enigma machine here in this museum as well. This looks like a 4-rotor, so this is the early Enigma machine. Very cool. For the citizens of Guernsey, one of the things that the Germans confiscated was radios. This was to keep them from having any communication with the outside world. So the citizens of Guernsey had to get creative and start kind of coming up with their own things. So here we see a crystal set. This was made by a guy named Hugh Tidd during the German occupation. There's his identification papers right there. I just noticed that. That's cool. And you can't just leave this thing laying out, of course. So you got to find some creative way to hide it, like maybe carving a section out of a book and then hiding it on the bookshelf. Here in this room, we have a scene that kind of follows up with the crystal radio that we just saw. Have a family here. Obviously, the father is sitting here at the table, and he is listening to his crystal radio, which is hidden in a basket. You have a mother who is watching at the window, making sure that no Germans are going to be slipping up on them while they are listening to reports on what's going on with the war. So during the occupation, again, the people of Guernsey were pretty much cut off from the rest of the world and relied on parcels from the Red Cross to deliver food and medical supplies and things like that. Obviously, the British were not allowed to bring supplies in to their own people. So what we're looking at here is the SS Vega. This is a ship that was used by the Red Cross to bring supplies into the residents here on the island of Guernsey. And then back here, well, we can see some of the things that arrived in those parcels. So here, looking at what is this? Some powdered milk. I see some coffee. I see some Canadian cheese. There were some parcels that came from Canada and some that came from New Zealand. So if you look right here, you can see the contents of the parcels. This arrived on December 27th of 1944, and it says for the first time with some 42,400 food parcels. All right, so it looks like if you got the Canadian parcel, you got yourself 6 ounces of chocolates, biscuits, sardines, milk powder, ham. I'm trying to see which one I would have preferred, if I would have preferred a Canadian one or a New Zealand one. The New Zealand one has raisins. So yeah, I would want the Canadian one. Here in this room, we are looking at some items that were, again, recovered from the bunkers here on Fortress Guernsey, or Festung Guernsey. Oh, wow. interesting. Here's a crankshaft from a Spitfire. Again, there's just so much that I can't show just because of lack of time. I know I've said that several times already, but the other day, Amanda took us to Battery Miras, and what we were looking at here is one of the actual shells that was recovered from Battery Miras. This is a 30.5 centimeter armor-piercing shell. Huh. Okay. Yeah, I wonder if you could just maybe kind of tell me the story of how you started this collection and how the museum came to be.
Well, I'm Richard Hume from Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and I was here during the occupation as a baby. After the war, there was a lot of German guns and material left around on our farm, and I used to explore. There was a firing range for the anti-aircraft guns and aircraft, and I used to collect the bullets. And when I was at school, we formed a group at school to explore and collect things from the fortifications. There was about 1,000 bunkers built in Guernsey and a garrison of 15,000. It was quite a lot of Germans. But at liberation, which by then we were very, very hungry in May 1945, although we had had the Red Cross ship at the end of 44, December the 27th, 44, we were all very hungry, the Germans were hungry, and we were pleased to be liberated. The Germans surrendered here on the island, and all their equipment and material was left here to be salvaged by the British Liberation Forces, and a lot of it went for scrap from the bunkers, but I was able to go in quite a few bunkers and tunnels where equipment was still there in the 50s and the 60s, and in 66 I was able to secure enough material to open this museum here in Guernsey.
Right. So Amanda was telling us a story about you going into a tunnel that you almost became a permanent resident of.
Yes,
Can you tell me about that?
1958. I used to go and out of school hours, I used to go and explore these tunnels on my own and get material from them for the museum. And on one occasion I was in there not realising that the tunnel was being sealed, and it was quite an 8-foot climb to get out and a very small 2-foot entrance we'd made to get in. I was nearly sealed in, but I was able to get out, and I continued going, sometimes late at night, to avoid being detected, because it was against the law to go in these things, and it was against the law to be collecting and bringing guns to school, etc.
Real quick thing, Richard told the story earlier of nearly being trapped in a tunnel. Here is a picture of that tunnel, and here's Richard right here. So yeah, he crawled in there, dug a hole, crawled in there, and when he was coming out, found that somebody was filling in the hole. So he almost became a permanent resident of that tunnel. This guy is something else. All right, so we've just made our way through the first part of the museum, and yesterday we were at a place called Fort Hommett, and I talked about the 60 millimeter searchlights that were present in the bunker as well. Or I'm sorry, not 60 millimeter, 60 centimeter. Well, look here, right here in this part of the museum, here's an example of one of these 60 centimeter searchlights. Now, the next part of the museum has a pretty amazing collection of some of the larger items that Richard has collected. All right, we've now moved to the back portion of the museum that has some of the larger items. And take a look at this. So what we are looking at are a couple of photos of a place called the White Hart Hotel. And this is down in St. Peter Port, so right there in the main city by the harbor. And the Germans actually built a casemate and kind of integrated it into the hotel. So you can see there kind of like this little hidden door that's made to look like a window. You can see the shutter there. And then here in the museum, well, they have kind of a model of the blockhouse of the White Hart Hotel. And then if we move around here, well, you can see that the museum has been made to look like a city street in St. Peter Port. And then if we come around here to the back end, well, you can see the inside with this 4.7 centimeter gun that is going to be firing down one of the streets in case the British try to retake the island of Guernsey. Oh, wow, take a look at this. So what we are looking at is a public notice announcing the execution of a guy by the name of Francois Cornet. He had escaped from France by boat and was trying to make it to the Isle of Wight. Ended up arriving in Guernsey by mistake, was tried by a German war court, and was shot at St. Owen's Manor in Jersey. And here you can see it says the population is herewith notified that Francois Cornet, born on May 25th, 1919, residing in Plojean, has been sentenced to death by the German war court and has been shot on March 17th, 1941. This has been done because of his favoring the actions of the enemy by willfully supporting England in the war against the German Empire. And you can see the date there. Wow. All right, we're just going to make our way down the street here. And again, we can't even show a fraction of what is in this museum in the time that we have. So here he has like a dang fire truck. This is a 1931 Albion Merryweather. So this was here during the occupation, and it says there on the information board that half of the fire crew wore British helmets and the other half wore German helmets. You can see we've got this German motorcycle here. And then we'll just walk to this back room real quick. Oh, love that sign. All right. Coming back into this room. Now, of course, Guernsey is an island, and on an island you might expect that there's a little bit of a fishing industry that they had. Well, during the occupation, people were not allowed to go out by boat for obvious reasons unless it was under the escort of a German soldier. So here, this boat right here, it says was built in 1906, 1907 time period, and was used through the 30s, and then was used during the German occupation. And here we can see what are some fishing permits. Okay, so people here on Guernsey would have to have permission in order to go out and fish their own waters. Here you can see a picture of German Customs Patrol coming up alongside a boat. And now it resides here in the museum. Now, another thing that these fishermen had to be aware of were things like this. This is a sea mine. So, yeah, could be quite dangerous to go out just to go fishing. Now, there are all kinds of weapons and vehicles and things like that that Richard has recovered. And then you see kind of this just regular car. This is a Trojan Tourer 1926. And here's something that's interesting about this car. When the Germans arrived on Guernsey, well, one of the things they did was confiscate all the vehicles. Well, there was this family here on the island that had no interest in having their vehicle confiscated. So they hid it in a shed, and it managed to remain unfound throughout the entire duration of the duration of the occupation of the island. Yeah, that's neat. All right, now we are moving into the last room here in the museum, which appropriately is talking about the liberation of Guernsey, which occurred on May the 9th of 1945. As a matter of fact, you can hear in the background, we've got some liberation music that is playing, and you can just imagine just how joyous the people must have been on this island after having been occupied by the Germans since June 30th of 1940. Now, the Liberation Force here on Guernsey was Force 135. So here you can see this is a shoulder patch that was worn by Brigadier General A.E. Snow, who was the Liberation Task Force commander. And then here they've got a couple mannequins set up showing what the uniforms looked like, with a flag in the back that says "God Save the King." Here they have a model of the HMS Bulldog. This is where the surrender of the Channel Islands took place. And then again, they just have a few artifacts here. Just all kinds of little things here. Okay, so here's some coal shovels from the HMS Bulldog. And then here we can see a photo. It says, at the second meeting, Zimmerman was accompanied by Major General Hein, who had been empowered by Vice Admiral Humphrey to sign the unconditional surrender. Hein shows his identification papers on boarding the HMS Bulldog at midnight, 9th of May, 1945. And then here, well, this is a handwritten note from the departing Germans that was found by Mr. and Mrs. Barnacote in their house on the day following the liberation. And it says, "The Germans wish you all on Guernsey a happy future and hope to see you again under something circumstances." That's interesting. Yeah, and then here, you can see on this newspaper, it says the war is over for Guernsey. What we are looking at here is a British steel helmet that was worn by a member of Task Force 135, which was the liberating force here on Guernsey. And if you've watched any episodes of American Artifact or anything like that, well, you know that I have a really soft spot for painted helmets. And take a look at this. This is amazing. Here's a German helmet that was painted with a liberation cartoon. It says here, possibly by a man named Bert Hill in May of 1945. That is absolutely incredible. And then here is another one. That is so cool. All right, well, there you go. That was the Occupation Museum right here on the island of Guernsey. That museum collection was absolutely amazing. And when I say I didn't show a fraction of what's in there, I'm talking like a small fraction. We just simply didn't have the time today, unfortunately. But anyway, when you come to Guernsey, definitely make the Occupation Museum one of your stops.